My name is Lyra and I am 45 years old now. I am the Royal Curator of the Grand Eldorian Archives, a position I helped to create, and my life is one of quiet purpose, surrounded by books and history and the quiet, steady love of a good man. But this story isn't about the woman I am today. It begins more than 2 decades ago when I was 19 on a cold, rain-swept night when a broken carriage wheel and a stranger's unexpected kindness saved me from a life I was certain was my only possible fate. It was the night my family, in an act of casual cruelty, pushed me out into the firelight hoping to be rid of a nuisance, and instead pushed me directly toward my destiny. They thought they were sending a lamb out into the storm. They had no idea they were sending her to meet a lion. Before I reveal how a plain, poor relation destined to be a governess found herself in the company of a prince, I'd love it if you let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you have ever, even once, felt overlooked or underestimated by the very people who should have believed in you the most, please hit that like button, because you will understand every moment of the journey I'm about to share. And for all the new viewers, if you enjoy stories about finding your own strength, consider subscribing to join our wonderful community. You're very welcome here. My life until that night had been a study in shades of gray. I was an orphan, a ward of my mother's brother, Lord Beaumont, and his wife, a woman whose name was Beatrice but whom I only ever thought of as Lady Beaumont. My parents had been scholars, gentle people who had loved books more than titles and had died of a fever when I was only 6, leaving me with little more than a trunk of their favorite volumes and a heart full of memories that were fading like old ink. The Beaumonts took me in, an act the world saw as charity but which felt from the inside like a long and protracted punishment for the crime of existing. Their home, Beaumont Manor, was a grand stone house that had seen better days. The tapestries were faded, the silver was thin from polishing, and a faint, persistent scent of damp and disappointment clung to the air. The Beaumonts had a title but their fortune was dwindling, a reality that made Lady Beaumont sharp and perpetually anxious. This anxiety was channeled into 2 primary pursuits: securing brilliant marriages for her own 2 daughters, and reminding me of my utter dependency and worthlessness. My cousins, Seraphina and Isolde, were the sons around which the Beaumont household revolved. Seraphina, the elder by 2 years, was a classical beauty, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky. Her beauty was a cold thing, however, as perfect and unyielding as a marble statue. She moved with an air of profound entitlement, her every glance a judgment. Isolde, a year younger than Seraphina, was a different kind of beautiful. She was all soft curves and flushed cheeks, with a kittenish charm that concealed a breathtakingly casual cruelty. She was the sort who would say the most devastating thing with a giggle, as if she couldn't possibly comprehend the sting of her own words. Together they were a formidable force of gilded disdain and I was their favorite target. They called me Mouse, or the Grey Ghost, mocking my simple mended dresses, my quiet nature and my preference for books over gossip. My aunt's pronouncements on my future were delivered with the finality of a death sentence. "Your face, Lyra, is a serviceable face," she told me one afternoon, while I was mending one of Isolde's lace cuffs. She did not look at me but at her own reflection in a tarnished mirror. "It is plain. It will not frighten the children and it will certainly not tempt their fathers. That is its primary and indeed only virtue. You are too poor for a dowry and too plain for a love match. Therefore your path is set. You will be a governess." The decision had been made that I would accompany them to the capital for the season, not to participate, of course. The very idea was laughable, but to be formally installed as the governess for the children of whichever wealthy Lord Seraphina managed to ensnare. I was to be part of her dowry, a living, breathing line item in a marriage contract. The humiliation of it was a physical weight, a constant pressure behind my ribs. My life was not my own. It was a resource to be allocated. I remember one particularly bleak afternoon, a week before we were set to leave. Isolde had found me in the dusty corner of the library, reading a book of poetry my father had given me. It was the only thing I had that was truly mine. She snatched it from my hands. "Poetry? Still?" she tittered, flipping through the pages with a dismissive air. "What use have you for poetry, Mouse? You can't recite verses to a toddler to make them eat their porridge." Seraphina drifted in, drawn by the sound of her sister's amusement. She took the book from Isolde. "Ode to a Grecian urn," she read aloud, her voice dripping with scorn. How very educational. Perhaps you can teach your future charges about dusty old pots. It will be a fitting subject coming from you. She let the book drop to the floor, its spine cracking on the stone. The sound was like a bone breaking in my own body. I didn't cry. I had learned long ago that tears only ever amused them. I simply knelt, picked up the broken volume and held it to my chest, the sharp edges of the cover digging into my palms. That night, I painstakingly repaired the spine with a needle and thread, my small stitches a quiet act of defiance against a world that saw no value in the things I cherished. This was my life. A tapestry woven from small cruelties, quiet endurances, and the crushing certainty that nothing would ever change. The journey to the capital was as miserable as I had anticipated. The Beaumont family carriage, while impressive from a distance, was drafty and smelled of mildew. I was seated on the small, uncomfortable bench opposite my aunt and cousins, squeezed next to a pile of hat boxes, feeling less like a passenger and more like an animate piece of luggage. For 3 days, I listened to Serafina complain about the quality of the roads, Isolde whine about the drabness of the scenery, and Lady Beaumont fret about whether the shade of Serafina's new ball gown was vibrant enough to catch the eye of the Duke of Alastair. I remained silent, a grey shadow in the corner, and sought refuge in the world outside the carriage window. I watched the rolling hills give way to dense forests, tracing the patterns of the branches against the sky, finding a small secret comfort in the wild, unjudging beauty of the world. It was a beauty that asked for nothing. On the 4th day the sky turned the color of a bruise. A cold, relentless rain began to fall, turning the forest road into a river of mud. The mood inside the carriage, already sour, curdled into open hostility. Lord Beaumont, a man whose presence was usually so negligible he seemed to be a piece of furniture, attempted a meek suggestion that they might have been better off waiting for the weather to clear at the last inn. Lady Beaumont silenced him with a look so withering it could have stopped a charging bull. It was in the midst of this suffocating atmosphere that disaster struck. There was a sudden violent lurch, a sound like a giant snapping twig, and the entire carriage dropped on one side with a sickening crunch. Isolde screamed. Serafina cursed, a very unladylike sound that she immediately stifled. The carriage shuddered to a halt, tilted at a drunken angle in the middle of the muddy track. The driver, a grim-faced man named Peters, opened the door, his face streaked with rain and worry. "The rear axle, my lord. It's split clean in two. And the wheel is shattered. We're not going anywhere." Panic erupted. Lady Beaumont's face went pale with fury. "What do you mean not going anywhere? We are miles from anywhere. We will miss the opening ball of the season." Her priorities, as always, were perfectly clear. Lord Beaumont dithered, poking his head out into the rain and then quickly retreating. "Dreadful. Simply dreadful," he murmured, wringing his hands. As dusk began to bleed through the forest canopy, a tiny pinprick of light appeared through the trees. It was a warm yellow light, flickering with the promise of a hearth. A house. A lodge of some kind. Hope and a new avenue for conflict presented itself. "Someone must go and ask for assistance," Lady Beaumont declared. "Peters, you will go." "Begging your pardon, my lady," Peters said, his voice firm, "but I cannot leave the horses. Not in this weather and not with the woods as they are. They're spooked as it is." Her gaze swept over her daughters. Both recoiled in horror. "Mother, you cannot be serious," Serafina said aghast. "My gown would be utterly ruined. And who knows what sort of rustic ruffians live in a place like that. There could be bears." Isolde added, her eyes wide. The collective gaze of the family, as if drawn by an invisible string, settled on me. I felt the familiar cold dread wash over me. It was always me. The disposable one. "Lyra will go," Serafina announced, her voice filled with a sudden malicious brightness. "Of course. She is dressed for trudging through mud anyway. And if some woodsman decides to have his way with her, well, it's no great loss to the family name, is it?" Isolde giggled, a cruel sharp sound. My aunt did not even bother to reprimand them. She simply nodded. "Yes, Lyra, you will go. Go to that light and fetch help. Do not fail." There was no discussion. No asking if I was afraid. I was a tool to be used. I looked from my aunt's hard face to my cousin's smug expressions, and then to my uncle, who was studiously avoiding my gaze, examining a loose thread on his waistcoat. In that moment, something inside me, a small, weary part of my spirit, simply gave up the fight. Numbly, I pulled my thin gray cloak around my shoulders, opened the carriage door and stepped out into the cold, driving rain. The mud immediately sucked at my worn shoes. They pushed me forward not with their hands, but with the sheer force of their expectation. And so I walked, a lone figure in gray, toward the flickering light in the woods, leaving the warmth and cruelty of the carriage behind me. Each step was a struggle. The hem of my dress grew heavy with mud and water, and the wind whipped the rain into my face, stinging my eyes. The forest, which had seemed so beautiful from the carriage window, was now a menacing tangle of shadows and strange noises. The branches of the ancient trees clawed at my cloak like skeletal fingers. I was terrified not of bears or bandits but of the people in that lodge. What would they think of this bedraggled creature appearing on their doorstep? What if they were unkind? What if they turned me away? The thought of returning to the carriage in failure, of facing my aunt's fury and my cousin's scorn, was almost as frightening as any imagined woodland beast. I kept my eyes fixed on the light, a tiny beacon in the overwhelming dark. It seemed to grow warmer, more inviting the closer I got. Finally, I stumbled out of the tree line and into a small clearing. Before me stood a handsome, sturdy hunting lodge, built of dark timber and river stone. A curl of smoke rose from its great stone chimney, and warm light spilled from its mullioned windows. It looked solid, safe. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I walked up the 3 stone steps to the heavy oak door and knocked. My knuckles barely made a sound against the thick wood. I knocked again, louder this time. The door swung open. A man stood silhouetted against the roaring fire in the hearth behind him. He was tall, dressed not in the silks and velvets of a nobleman, but in simple, well-made hunting clothes of dark wool and leather. His face was in shadow, but I could see he was young, perhaps only a few years older than I was. For a moment we just stared at each other. He seemed surprised to see anyone, let alone a lone, drenched young woman on his doorstep. I found my voice, though it came out as a reedy whisper. "Forgive me for the intrusion, sir. Our carriage. It has broken down on the road. The axle is split. We are stranded." I clutched my thin cloak tighter, conscious of what a pathetic sight I must be. Water dripped from the end of my nose and my hair was plastered to my cheeks. He stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in out of the rain. At once." His voice was deep and resonant, with a faint, unplaceable accent. It was a voice accustomed to command, yet it held a surprising gentleness. I hesitated on the threshold, dripping onto his clean-planked floor. Another man, older and broader, with a thick gray beard and watchful eyes, appeared at his shoulder. He looked me over with a professional, assessing gaze that made me feel like an insect under a pin. The younger man ignored him. His focus was entirely on me. "You are soaked through. Please come to the fire." He gestured toward the massive stone hearth. The warmth that radiated from it was a physical blessing, and I took a few steps into the room, my body trembling, though whether from cold or fear I couldn't say. "My family is in the carriage," I explained, my teeth chattering slightly. "My aunt and uncle and my sisters." The lie slipped out before I could stop it. In my world, cousins who lived with you were treated as sisters, and explaining the precise, miserable dynamic of my relation felt impossibly complicated. He nodded, his eyes kind. In the flickering firelight, his features became clearer. He had a strong, angular face with dark, serious eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. His hair was the color of dark honey, unruly from the weather. "My man Casper will see to them. We have plenty of room. You will all be safe here for the night." He looked at me, a strange, thoughtful expression on his face. The firelight was playing tricks, softening the plainness of my features, hiding the mended seams of my dress under the shadow of my cloak. It caught the sincerity in my eyes, the earnest fear and relief. To him I was not the gray ghost. I was a young woman in distress. "Do not worry, my lady," he said softly. "Everything will be all right." The words hit me like a physical blow. My lady, he thought I was one of them. He assumed, from the carriage and my manner of speech, that I was a noblewoman. The daughter, not the ward. A lifetime of conditioning screamed at me to correct him, to abase myself, to explain my lowly position. But another, more terrified part of me imagined the scene. My aunt, hearing me declare myself a penniless relation to this stranger, would be apoplectic. I would have brought shame upon them. I would have ruined any chance of assistance. The words caught in my throat. I could only manage a small jerky nod. The lie had been told and now it began to grow. I followed him back out into the rain, the older man, Casper, striding ahead with a lantern. When we reached the carriage, the scene inside was one of sour, impatient waiting. The moment they saw me returning with two well-dressed men, the atmosphere changed instantly. Lady Beaumont's face transformed, smoothing into an expression of gracious condescension. Seraphina and Isolde began subtly adjusting their hair and gowns. "My dears," I said, my voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "This gentleman has offered us shelter for the night." My aunt's eyes narrowed, first at the simple hunting clothes of our rescuer, then at me. There was a question in her eyes. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head, a silent plea. When Lady Beaumont spoke to the man, her voice was all honeyed charm. "You are too kind, sir. We are the Beaumonts. I am Lady Beaumont, and these are my daughters, Seraphina and Isolde." She deliberately skipped over me. The man bowed slightly. "It is my honor. I am Alaric. Please, my lodge is yours." As he helped my aunt down from the carriage, Seraphina grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "What did you tell him?" she hissed in my ear. "Who is he?" I don't know," I stammered. "He calls himself Alaric. He mistook me for a lady." A strange, calculating glint appeared in Seraphina's eyes. A slow, cruel smile spread across her perfect lips. "Did he now?" she murmured, looking from me to the tall stranger. "How perfectly amusing. Don't you dare correct him, Lyra. Let him think it. Let him think you are one of us. It will be a diverting little game until we discover if he's worth my time." Lady Beaumont must have overheard because she gave a sharp, affirmative nod. "Do as your cousin says, Lyra. For once in your life, make yourself useful. Do not embarrass us." I was trapped. The lie was no longer just mine. It had been adopted, weaponized, and turned into a command. My brief moment of connection with our host was now a stage, and I was being forced to play a role I never wanted. The lodge was even more impressive inside. It was one large, baronial hall with a high-beamed ceiling and floors covered in thick furs. Antlers and hunting trophies adorned the walls, but there was also a surprising refinement. A shelf of leather-bound books, a beautifully carved chest set on a small table, a silver flute resting on a mantelpiece. It was a space of masculine comfort but also of culture. Our host, Alaric, introduced himself more formally as a minor baron from the kingdom of Eldoria, traveling for the autumn hunt. A baron. I could almost feel the temperature in the room drop as Lady Beaumont and Seraphina mentally reassessed his value. A mere baron was hardly a prize catch, but he was certainly better than being stranded in a muddy forest. They decided to maintain their charm offensive just in case he had wealthy connections. Casper and another servant brought our trunks in from the rain-soaked carriage. Lady Beaumont immediately dispatched me to find suitable evening attire for her daughters. "And find something for yourself, Lyra," she commanded, her voice loud enough for Alaric to hear. "Something presentable." The implication was clear. I was to look the part one had been assigned. Rooting through the trunks, I felt a wave of despair. My own meager wardrobe consisted of 3 identical gray wool dresses. Seraphina, with a sigh of theatrical generosity, tossed one of her gowns at me. It was a simple one of dark blue velvet, one she considered too plain for the capital but which was, to me, the most luxurious thing I had ever touched. "Wear that," she ordered. "It will make you look less like a scullery maid. Try not to spill anything on it." Changing in a small, cold antechamber, the velvet felt alien against my skin. It was too fine, too rich. When I looked at my reflection in a small looking-glass, I barely recognized myself. The dark blue color made my pale skin seem luminous and brought out the gray in my eyes, making them look like storm clouds. The simple cut of the dress was elegant, not frumpy. For the first time I looked, not beautiful perhaps, but significant. The transformation felt like another layer of the lie, a costume for the role I was being forced to play. When I returned to the main hall, Alaric was speaking with Lord Beaumont, who was puffing out his chest and pontificating about his own meager hunting experiences. Seraphina and Isolde were arranged artfully near the fire, hoping to draw Alaric's eye. But when I entered, his conversation with my uncle faltered. His gaze fell on me and he simply stopped talking. He looked at me, really looked for a long moment. A faint smile touched his lips. "That color suits you, my lady," he said, his voice quiet, intended only for me. Serafina's back stiffened. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. "Thank you," I murmured, looking down at the floor. The family, seeing his attention fixed on me, pushed me forward. "Go on, Lyra," my aunt whispered harshly. "Talk to him. Be charming." It was a horrifying, impossible command. I had never been taught to be charming. I had been taught to be invisible. I sat stiffly in the chair Alaric offered me, my hands clenched in my lap. I was certain I would make a fool of myself, that my provincial ignorance would be immediately apparent. But he didn't ask about court gossip or high fashion. He noticed the small worn book of poetry I had instinctively tucked into my pocket before leaving the carriage. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to it. Numbly I handed it to him. He opened it with a reader's reverence. "Keats," he said, a look of genuine pleasure on his face. A man who understood that truth and beauty are the same thing. And just like that we were talking. He asked me what I thought of the poem, and instead of giving a simple answer I found myself speaking from the heart, telling him how the words made me feel, how they painted pictures in my mind. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made me feel as though I were the only person in the room. He spoke of the poets from his own country, of Eldorian epics about mountains and dragons and the honor of scholars. He talked about philosophy, about the Stoics, and the idea that true wealth lies not in what you have, but in what you are. For the first time in my life I was having a conversation that was not about marriage or money or my own inadequacies. It was a meeting of minds, a spark of recognition in the wilderness. I forgot I was wearing a borrowed dress. I forgot the lie. I forgot my aunt's glare and my cousin's resentful pouting. I was just Lyra, speaking with a man who saw past my plain face and found something interesting within. Serafina could not stand it. She glided over, interrupting with a tinkling laugh. "Oh, how tedious you two are. All this talk of dusty old books. Baron, you simply must tell us about the court in Eldoria. Are the ladies as beautiful as they say?" Alaric turned to her, his expression polite but cool. "The ladies of my country are known more for their wit and their skill in statecraft than for their beauty, Lady Serafina," he replied smoothly. "We believe a sharp mind is a woman's greatest jewel." The rebuke was so subtle, so perfectly delivered, that Serafina didn't even seem to realize she had been insulted. She simply blinked and used to a man who was not immediately captivated by her face. She tried again, asking about the royal hunts, but Alaric answered her questions with brief, courteous replies before turning his attention back to me. "You were saying, my lady," he prompted gently, "about the use of metaphor in the final stanza?" The "my lady" still felt like a shard of glass in my throat, but the warmth in his eyes made it almost bearable. The evening wore on like that, a strange dreamlike play. My family tried repeatedly to seize the spotlight, only to find it stubbornly fixed on me. Isolde attempted to flirt, batting her eyelashes and speaking in a breathy voice, but Alaric seemed almost not to notice her. Lady Beaumont tried to drop hints about Serafina's many accomplishments, her needlepoint, her passable grasp of French, but he would only nod politely. It was me he wanted to talk to. Me. The grey ghost. Later, as a simple but hearty meal of roasted game and dark bread was served, the gruff older man Caspar came and stood near the fire. He watched the proceedings with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. At one point I dropped my napkin. Before I could retrieve it, Caspar bent his stiff form and picked it up, handing it to me. Our eyes met for a second. His were a piercing blue and they held no illusions. He saw my worn shoes peeking out from beneath the hem of the velvet dress. He saw the nervous way I held my fork. He saw everything. But there was no contempt in his gaze, only a quiet, weary assessment. He knew. I was certain he knew I was a fraud. Yet he said nothing. He simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod and moved away. The small gesture was strangely comforting. It was as if he too was a watcher in this game, a silent observer of the follies of others. The more Alaric and I spoke, the more I felt myself drowning. I was caught between the exquisite joy of being seen for who I was, and the suffocating guilt of the lie I was embodying. He was captivated by the sincerity of a woman who was, at that very moment, deceiving him with her every breath. The irony was a bitter poison. As the evening drew to a close and we were shown to our rooms, Lady Beaumont cornered me in the hallway. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You are playing a dangerous game, girl," she hissed, her voice a low venom. "You have his attention. Do not think for a moment that it belongs to you. It is an accident, a novelty. When he tires of your drab little thoughts, he will see Serafina. Your job is to keep him entertained until then. Do you understand? Do not ruin this for us." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I went to the small clean room I was given, the borrowed velvet feeling like a shroud. I was not a person. I was a lure. A piece of bait in my family's relentless, desperate hunt for advantage. And the worst part was, for a few stolen hours I had forgotten it. I had allowed myself to feel like a lady. The storm passed during the night, leaving the world washed clean and glistening under a pale morning sun. At breakfast, Alaric announced that his men had already begun to work on our carriage. "It is a significant break," he said, looking at Lord Beaumont. "It will take them the better part of the day to fashion a new axle. I insist you remain here as my guests until it is repaired." Lady Beaumont and her daughters preened, seeing this as another opportunity. For me it was a reprieve and a renewed sentence. Another day of this exquisite torture. After the meal, Alaric approached me where I stood by the window, looking out at the steaming forest. "The air is fresh after the storm," he said. "I was planning a walk to check my snares. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me, my lady?" The invitation was quiet, directed only at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Serafina's face tighten into a mask of pure rage. Isolde looked as if she might actually cry from the injustice of it all. Lady Beaumont, however, recovered quickly. She saw this as progress. She gave me a sharp, meaningful look and a tiny nod. "Go on, Lyra," she said, her voice cloyingly sweet. "A walk would do you good." She followed me to the door, grabbing my arm when Alaric was out of earshot. "This is your chance," she whispered fiercely. "Find out about his lands, his fortune. Be clever. Do not for one second be yourself. And do not ruin this for your cousin." Her fingers dug into my arm, a final, painful reminder of my purpose. I was a spy in another woman's dress, sent to scout the terrain for my family's ambitions. We walked out into the crisp morning air. The forest floor was a carpet of damp leaves, and the sunlight, filtering through the high canopy, dappled the ground in shifting patterns of gold. For a while we walked in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the crunch of our boots and the chirping of birds. He was a natural woodsman, moving with an easy, confident stride, pointing out the tracks of a deer, the nest of a hawk. I, in turn, pointed out a rare wildflower I recognized from one of my father's botany books. He was impressed. "You have a scholar's eye," he said, smiling. That smile did strange things to my insides. It was a genuine, unguarded expression, and it made me feel warm from the inside out. As we walked, he began to speak more personally. He told me of Eldoria, his home, a small kingdom nestled in the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. He described it not in terms of its wealth or power but in terms of its spirit. "We are a quiet people," he explained, his eyes distant as if seeing the peaks themselves. "We value knowledge over gold and character over lineage. Our court is simple compared to the grand empires. There is little room for artifice on a mountainside. The wind tends to blow it all away." He spoke of his own life with a surprising melancholy. He confessed his weariness with the endless parade of simpering debutantes and grasping fathers at the great courts he was expected to visit. "They see a title, a crown," he said, his voice low. "They don't see the man. They present a perfect, polished version of themselves, all charm and accomplishment. It's like speaking to a room full of beautifully painted dolls. There's nothing real to hold on to." His words were a spear through my heart. He was describing my cousins. He was describing the very deception I was perpetrating. The guilt became a physical thing, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. He stopped by a small, clear stream and turned to face me. The morning light fell full on his face and I saw the sincerity etched there. "That is why meeting you has been such a revelation," he continued, his voice soft and earnest. "You are not like them. There is a quiet strength in you, a depth. A noble spirit that has nothing to do with titles or gowns. It is simply you." That was it. That was the moment the fragile facade I had been hiding behind shattered into a million pieces. He was praising me for a genuineness I was actively betraying. He was admiring an honesty that was a complete and utter lie. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't let him say another word, couldn't let him build his admiration on this foundation of deceit. My carefully constructed composure crumbled. A single hot tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my cold cheek. "Sir," I began, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form the word. "Alaric. I cannot." He looked concerned. "My lady? Are you unwell?" "That is the problem," I whispered, forcing myself to meet his gaze, wanting him to see the truth in my eyes even as I spoke it. "I am not, my lady." The words, once uncorked, came tumbling out in a torrent of shame and fear. "My name is Lyra. I am not Lady Seraphina. I am not a Beaumont by name, only by blood. I am her cousin. Her poor relation. I live with them on their charity. I am to be her children's governess. That is all I am. That is all I will ever be." I told him everything. I told him how my cousins had refused to go to the lodge, how they had pushed me forward, calling me disposable. I told him how Seraphina had commanded me to maintain the lie, how my aunt had ordered me to play this part for their family's gain. I confessed that the dress I wore was not my own, that the confidence he saw in me was a desperate, fleeting performance. I hid nothing. With every word I felt his regard for me turning to ash. I expected him to recoil in disgust. I expected fury, contempt. I expected him to shout for his guards, to have me thrown out of his lands for my impertinence, for daring to deceive him. When I was finished, I hung my head, unable to look at him, bracing myself for the inevitable explosion. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched for an impossibly long time, broken only by the gurgle of the stream and the frantic beating of my own heart. I was a fraud, a liar, and I had just destroyed the one beautiful moment of my entire life. Finally he spoke. His voice, when it came, was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Look at me, Lyra." Slowly, hesitantly I raised my head. I forced my eyes to meet his, preparing for the condemnation I knew I deserved. But what I saw there stunned me into stillness. There was no anger. There was no disgust. His dark eyes were filled with a profound, aching sorrow and something else, something I couldn't quite name, a simmering, controlled fire. It was fury, I realized, but none of it was directed at me. "A governess," he said, the words a soft exhalation of disbelief. He took a step closer. "They would take a mind like yours, a spirit like yours, and waste it on teaching sums and needlepoint to their spoilt children? They would use your honesty as a weapon in their own petty games." He wasn't angry with me for the lie. He understood with a terrifying and wonderful clarity that I had been given no choice. He was angry for me. He saw the cage I lived in, and his anger was for the keepers of that cage. "I owe you an apology as well, Lyra," he said, his voice growing stronger, firmer. "I have not been entirely truthful with you. My name is Alaric. But I am not a baron." He straightened to his full height, and in that moment the simple woodsman vanished, replaced by something else, something far more powerful and commanding. A sense of innate authority settled over him like a royal mantle. "My full title is Alaric Reynard Christophe, Crown Prince of Aldoria. And the sincerity I was so drawn to in you last night, it is all the more remarkable now that I know the truth of your circumstances. To maintain such grace and intelligence while living under that kind of cruelty, that is not the mark of a governess. That is the mark of a queen." My mind reeled. A prince. A crown prince. My family had schemed and postured and pushed me forward to impress a minor baron, and they had, through their own blindness and cruelty, managed to insult the heir to a throne. The irony was so immense, so staggering, that a wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, though I managed to choke it down. Prince Alaric watched the play of emotions on my face. Shock, fear, a dawning, incredulous hope. His expression softened. "I am not angered by your deception, Lyra," he said, his voice gentle once more. "I am humbled by your courage in telling me the truth. And I am more determined than ever to ensure that you are never again at the mercy of your family." He said the word family as if it were a curse. He saw everything. He saw me. And in his eyes I was not plain, I was not poor, I was not a nuisance. I was just Lyra. And for a prince that was more than enough. The walk back to the lodge was surreal. The world around me was the same dappled sunlight, the same damp, earthy smell. But I was fundamentally changed. I walked beside a prince who knew my deepest shame and did not judge me for it. He didn't press me with questions or offer empty platitudes. Instead, he resumed our conversation from the night before, asking my opinion on a passage from Seneca, as if nothing had happened. It was the greatest gift he could have given me. The gift of normalcy, of being treated as his intellectual equal even now. He was showing me, not telling me, that my station meant nothing to him. My mind, my character, that was what he valued. As we approached the clearing, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The confrontation was coming. Alaric must have sensed my fear. He paused just before we stepped out of the treeline. "You have nothing to fear from them anymore, Lyra," he said, his voice firm and reassuring. "You are under my protection now." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, it felt like an unbreakable vow. We entered the lodge. The Beaumonts were all gathered near the fire, waiting. Seraphina and Isolde were posed like porcelain dolls. Lady Beaumont wore an expectant smile, and Lord Beaumont was attempting to look patriarchal and important. The moment they saw us, Lady Beaumont rose. "Baron, we were just saying a walk was just the thing. We do hope Lyra was not too tiresome with her endless chatter about books." Her attempt at charm was grotesque now that I knew the truth. Alaric's entire demeanor shifted. The warm, engaging scholar I had walked with in the woods was gone. In his place stood a prince. His posture was straighter, his expression was shuttered and cold, and an aura of immense, ancient authority emanated from him. He gave Lady Beaumont a look so icy it could have frozen the fire in the hearth. He walked to the center of the room, his boots making a solid, deliberate sound on the wooden floor. He did not look at the cousins. He addressed my aunt and uncle directly, his voice ringing with a command they had never before encountered. "Lord and Lady Beaumont," he began, and the room fell silent. "It has come to my attention that there has been a significant misunderstanding." Lady Beaumont's smile faltered. I don't understand, Baron." "Neither, it seems, do I," Alaric replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "You see, I was under the impression that your family valued honesty. That you traveled with ladies of character." He let the words hang in the air, a palpable condemnation. He then turned his gaze for the first time on me. It was not a cold gaze, but one filled with a quiet, public support. "This young woman, Lyra, has just displayed a level of courage and integrity that I have seldom witnessed in any court in this land. She has told me the truth of her situation. All of it." The color drained from Lady Beaumont's face. Seraphina and Isolde exchanged panicked glances. Lord Beaumont began to sweat. "She told me," Alaric continued, his voice dropping, becoming more intense, "how you deemed her disposable. How you pushed her out into a storm to do a task you were too cowardly to do yourselves. And how you commanded her to deceive me for your own potential gain." He paused, letting the weight of their crimes settle upon them. "You sought to use her as a pawn in your social maneuvering. You saw her only as a tool. You were so blinded by your own ambitions that you failed to see the treasure you had in your own house. Now see here," Lord Beaumont blustered, finding a sliver of his bravado. "This is a family matter. You have no right." Alaric cut him off with a single sharp gesture. "I have every right. For you see, Lord Beaumont, you have not insulted a minor baron. You have insulted the Crown Prince of Eldoria." He delivered the line without flourish, a simple statement of fact that landed in the room with the force of a thunderclap. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by a small, strangled gasp from Isolde. My aunt and uncle stared, their faces a comical mask of horror and disbelief. Seraphina looked as though she had been turned to stone. All their hopes, all their petty schemes had just collapsed into a pile of dust. Your Highness," my uncle stammered, bowing so low he nearly fell over. Lady Beaumont curtsied, her body trembling. "A mistake. A terrible mistake. We beg your forgiveness." Alaric held up a hand, silencing them. "Your apologies are of no interest to me. My only concern now is for Lyra." He turned to me and his entire expression softened once more, the warmth returning to his eyes. He was deliberately showing them the difference in how he saw me and how he saw them. "Lyra has done me a great service with her honesty," he announced to the room. "In my country such character is valued above all else. I find myself in need of a person with a keen, scholarly mind and unimpeachable integrity to assist me with a project of great importance in our capital. I would be honored if she would agree to accompany me back to Eldoria, as my personal guest, under my direct protection." It was not an offer. It was a command wrapped in the language of courtesy. He was extricating me from their lives as cleanly and efficiently as a surgeon removing a thorn. The Beaumonts were utterly broken. To refuse a direct request from a crown prince was unthinkable. It would mean social and political ruin. They stood there, trapped between their lifelong habit of belittling me and the terrifying reality of the power this man wielded. They could do nothing but stammer their assent. "Of course, Your Highness, an honor. For Lyra, of course." My aunt couldn't even look at me. Seraphina's face was a ruin of jealousy and hatred, her beautiful features twisted into an ugly sneer. This was a humiliation from which she would never recover. And I, who had spent my entire life cowering before these people, felt a strange, quiet calm settle over me. I was not gloating. I felt no triumph. I just felt free. The cage door had been thrown open. Prince Alaric turned his back on them, a final, dismissive gesture. He walked to me, and in the profound silence of that room filled with my family's shattered ambitions, he spoke to me, his voice low and gentle for my ears alone. "Will you come, Lyra? The choice is yours." For the first time in my life I was being given a real choice. I looked at the family who had caused me so much pain, and I felt not anger but a deep, sorrowful pity for their small, grasping lives. Then I looked at the prince, at the man who had seen the truth of me through a veil of lies and plainness. And I found my own voice, a voice I barely recognized, clear and steady and sure. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Your Highness. I will." I left the lodge with Prince Alaric and Caspar a short time later, carrying only the small trunk containing my father's books. I did not look back at my family, standing like statues of salt beside their newly repaired carriage, left behind in the mud and the ruins of their own making. The journey to Eldoria was like waking from a long, grey dream into a world of vibrant color. Prince Alaric, he insisted I call him Alaric when we were alone, treated me not as a rescued damsel, but as a fascinating traveling companion. We talked for hours as our carriage rolled through lands that grew increasingly wild and beautiful. We spoke of history, of science, of art, of ethics. He would listen to my thoughts with that same focused intensity one had first seen in the lodge, often stopping me to say, "That's a remarkable way of seeing it." I hadn't considered that. He was drawing out the parts of me I had kept hidden for years, the thoughts and ideas I had believed were worthless. He gave them value simply by listening. Caspar, his stoic guard, remained a quiet presence, but I would occasionally catch him watching us, a flicker of what looked like approval in his stern blue eyes. Once, when we stopped at an inn, a pompous local merchant tried to flatter the prince, ignoring me completely. Caspar stepped forward and said in his gravelly voice, "The prince is in conversation with the lady. You will wait." The merchant sputtered but backed away. It was a small thing, but it was another brick in the foundation of my new reality. I was a person of consequence now. When we arrived in Eldoria's capital, a city of elegant silverstone towers nestled in a high mountain valley, Alaric did not hide me away. He did not introduce me to the court as a prospective bride or a romantic conquest. He did something far more revolutionary. He introduced me as his advisor. The project he had mentioned was the creation of the first Royal Eldorian Archive, a grand library that would consolidate the kingdom's vast collection of books, maps, and historical documents. "And this," he announced at his first council meeting upon his return, gesturing to me, "is Mistress Lyra, the brilliant scholar from a foreign land who has agreed to oversee its curation. Her insights will be invaluable." The court was stunned. I was a woman, a foreigner, and a commoner. But Alaric's word was law. He gave me rooms in the palace, a staff, and a budget. He gave me purpose. He gave me work that lit up my soul. I spent my days in a happy sea of parchment and ink, organizing, translating, and building something real and lasting. The whispering of the courtiers at first was a constant buzz. They called me the prince's plain pet, or the little gray moth. One particularly snooty duchess tried to challenge me at a public dinner, questioning my credentials. Before Alaric could intervene, I found myself calmly and methodically dismantling her arguments with facts and logic, quoting 3 different historical sources from memory. A hush fell over the table. After that, the whispers began to change. They started to speak of my intelligence, my quiet authority. They began to see what Alaric had seen. My plainness became irrelevant. My mind was my credential. Our own relationship grew slowly, naturally, out of this shared work and mutual respect. We would spend late nights debating the best way to categorize ancient texts, our hands occasionally brushing as we reached for the same book. Our friendship deepened into a quiet, profound affection. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic courtship. It was a love built not on fleeting passion, but on the solid bedrock of 1,000 shared conversations, 100 moments of understanding. About a year after my arrival, he asked me to marry him. We were in the nearly completed Great Hall of the archive, the scent of fresh-cut wood and old paper in the air. He didn't kneel. He simply took my hands and said, "I cannot imagine my life or my kingdom without you in it, Lyra. Will you be my partner in all things? Will you be my wife?" And my yes was the easiest, most certain word I had ever spoken. We married, and I became not just a princess, but a true partner in his reign. One day a letter arrived bearing the Beaumont seal. It was from my aunt. It was a long, rambling missive full of false praise for my good fortune, thinly veiled reminders of her charity in raising me, and finally, a desperate plea for me to use my new influence to secure a good match for Serafina, who was apparently still unmarried and growing bitter. I read the letter and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. The words were from another lifetime, a ghost story that no longer had the power to frighten me. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and went back to my work, never sending a reply. My family thought my only value was in what I could do for them. They saw a plain face and a quiet nature and assumed that was the entire story. They never bothered to read the book. They only judged its simple cover. In the end, their cruelty didn't trap me as they intended. It catapulted me into a life beyond my wildest dreams. They pushed me into the firelight, and in its glow, someone finally saw the gold they had always overlooked. The greatest lesson I learned is that your worth is not a reflection in someone else's eyes. It is a fire you tend within yourself. For years I allowed my family's opinion to be my mirror, and I saw only a plain, worthless girl. It took the kindness of a stranger, a prince no less, to show me a different reflection. But his validation was only the beginning. The real victory came when I learned to see that worthiness for myself, to tend my own fire until it burned so brightly that it no longer mattered who else saw it. My value was never in my face or my station. It was in my mind, my resilience, and my heart. And those are things no one can ever take from you. So I ask you, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever had someone try to tell you what your limits are? Share your story in the comments below. Reading about your journeys of proving people wrong is one of the most inspiring things I get to do. Thank you for listening to my story today. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories of finding your own strength in the most unexpected places. Remember, sometimes the people who believe in you the least end up giving you the most powerful motivation of all. Thank you for being here with me.